Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NTI PodTalk. My name is Dianne Kaler, and I'm the Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute. This PodTalk is our opportunity to have fun conversations with interesting people who have interesting things to say about nutrition, food, and health. I talk to NTI instructors, students and grads, to health industry professionals, to farmers, and anyone else who has an interest in nutritional wellness. While many of our listeners come from within the NTI community as students and grads, we also have prospective students who tune in. And to those listeners in particular, I hope you find that the people we talk to inspire you to finally make the jump to pursue your passion and come to school here at NTI. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Hello, everyone. This is Dianne Kaler, Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute, back for another edition of our NTI PodTalk. Today, I'm talking with Autumn Smith, who is from Wild Pastures. And as you all know, if you're regular listeners, I really like talking to people who produce the food that we and I consume, because I think that the more you know about where your food comes from, the better you are able to make better decisions about your food choices. So I'm thrilled to be talking to you, Autumn. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on our show today.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here. It's my favorite topic, and it's nice to connect with another local. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so tell us about your background, Wild Pastures, how you got into this, and what is your role with Wild Pastures and what do you do there?
Yeah, so basically my story is very long, but I will keep it short. I had a lot of digestive issues ever since I was a child, digestive and mental health issues. And I always managed, but I wasn't thriving. We couldn't say I was thriving. And so when I met my husband, and I was actually working as a celebrity fitness trainer down in Los Angeles, and he's like, well, you look great, but when you really get to know you, you're really suffering. So let's figure this out. And so we went to doctors in LA, which we thought may be different than the doctors in Montana where I grew up, but they didn't really have a solution. They just said I had irritable bowel syndrome and anxiety, and I should, manage that. But he decided, well, let's try changing our diet, because he saw a few people in a little corner of the internet were having luck with that. At the time, it was kind of a novel idea, and I didn't believe it would help, but it really helped. It literally transformed my life. And so I quit that job as a fitness trainer and went back to school. Originally, I got my master's in holistic nutrition. I'm just about to finish my doctorate now. I got an eating psychology certificate. I got a, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I became obsessed with how do I give what happened to me to everybody else? And what we realized along the way is there's a lot of really effective educators already in the space. And so we wanted to meet people there with physical products. Like, how do we give the people like additive-free, super clean, grass-fed, organic, high-quality products that can just make a healthy life a lot easier? Paleovalley was our original business, and that does, grass-fed meat sticks and collagen and superfood bars and supplements, whole food supplements. And then Wild Pastures came after my son was born, and we had all these pre-existing relationships with these regenerative farmers, and they were teaching us about the nuance between grass-fed and regenerative, and they were telling us that they didn't know how to access the market that they needed in order to incentivize these regenerative practices. And so we thought, well, we have a marketing background and an audience, so why don't we just connect them to people and be really creative about keeping our costs low? So we are 40% lower price than most other meat delivery services, and only from American regenerative farmers, because a lot of the grass-fed market comes like 70 to 80% comes from other countries. And so that was our meat delivery service. And then our burger company came out of the fact that we often have extra ground beef. That's just how the supply chain kind of works. And we always prioritize whole animal utilization. And so we thought, well, people of Boulder could probably use a good grass-fed burger. And we found a really interested partner who had the funding for us and was really passionate about environmental science and nutrition. And so we created our burger company that we don't have any sugar, no soda. Even in the house-made sauces, there's no sugar. And we source from exclusively American regenerative farms.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I, have been on a subscription for Paleovalley meat sticks for a while. My family enjoys eating at the Wild Pastures Burger place in Boulder. It's kind of one of like two restaurants that we go to in the area. And I also have a subscription at Wild Pastures to get meat delivery. And I am very happy about the fact that you have a commitment to well-raised animal foods, because that is really important to me. So you mentioned that you were talking to these producers, and there was kind of this question about what's the difference between grass-fed and regenerative agriculture. And so can you talk about that? What is regenerative agriculture, and how is that different than just something that has a label of being grass-fed?
Absolutely. I'm actually working on a dissertation that's kind of going to get right to that matter, but I want to start broad. And there's essentially three types of agriculture happening today. There's conventional, where we use, chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides and essentially work against nature. And then we have sustainable, which a lot of people are really excited about and interested in. But sustainable is something like organic, right? Because it's not making the land worse, but because of tillage, there are still some practices that degrade our land, even used in organic. So some organic can be regenerative, but not all of it is. And then we have regenerative, which at its heart is essentially just taking land and returning it to a higher or more worthy state. So it's measuring ecological outcomes and tracking them over time to be sure that we're improving things like the levels of organic matter and carbon in the soil and the water holding capacity and the biodiversity on the farm. And so regenerative is where we need to go. And it's really, really important, because the state of our soil today is not where it needs to be. In fact, the nutrient levels in our food are lower than they've been at any other time in history. And a lot of people think it's just because there's been this dilution of it because we prioritized yield. But what's actually at the heart of it, at least partially, is the breakdown of soil biology. We've killed the biology in the soil, and this biology is what connects the nutrients in the soil to the plants and eventually the animals and humans who consume them. And so we've lost, we're losing topsoil at a rate 13 times faster than it's being built. And, 30 million acres every year are lost. And so if we continue down the trajectory that we're on, we're in for a rude awakening. No one's sure exactly how many harvests we have left, but it isn't a good picture. And so regenerative agriculture says, yes, we're going to take every land in context. So it's different how we would approach it depending on where you live and the tools and environment that they're in. And also we're going to increase biodiversity on that farm. We're going to use animal impact on that farm. We're going to keep living roots in the soil as often as possible. We're going to do least disturbance. That means with chemicals and fertilizers and even tilling. And we're going to keep soil armor, because if we leave bare soil, a lot of the times we only use cash crops for about a third of the year. And other times we'll see just the fields are fallow, right? There's nothing on there. Mm-hmm. That's really dangerous, because the soil essentially gets burnt. It can erode, the water within it will evaporate. And so it's just a set of principles that essentially rehabilitates the ecosystem and kind of restarts the cycles of nature, the nutrient cycle, the water cycle, the mineral cycle. And also it's able to actually bring carbon out of the air and sequester it back into the soil, which is exactly where we need it to be. So regenerative ag is just regenerating our kind of destroyed soils and ecosystems that are a direct result of the agricultural practices that we've been using for about 10,000 years.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that you would agree that animals must be on that land in order for the regenerative process.
Yes, I firmly believe that. Now, I know I have asked that same question, and I have talked to farmers, ranchers who say a lot of progress can be made without animals, right? So there isn't that it can't be done. But when you add animal impact, animals are like fertilizers, right? They are manure. 50% of the fertilizer used worldwide is manure, right? And they're just putting those nutrients back into the soil. Their little hoof prints are creating divots. They're allowing seeds to germinate. They're allowing water to get into the soil, and their saliva, right? That's adding stuff and nutrients and into the soil as well. And they're stimulating the grass growth, because The grass is essentially a straw that's taking carbon out of the air and putting it underground. And when you're constantly chewing on that and, grazing it in an appropriate manner, it improves the ability to bring carbon down and go exactly where it needs to go. So yes, animal impact is going to make any rehabilitative process so much faster. And I sincerely believe it is one of the most important factors for truly healthy ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally agree with that. And I love the way you say that the grass is a straw that brings carbon and gets it into the soil. That's a fabulous way of talking about it. I love that visual. All right. So do you yourself own a ranch, or you just source from other ranches? This is something that I'm unclear about.
Yeah, no, you know what? I grew up in Montana, so ranching is just kind of in my area, and it was something I had a lot around me. But no, I don't today own a ranch. And literally, I had no idea my life would go this direction. It was only because of those relationships they became all of our colleagues, right? All these farmers and ranchers who were creating the beef that went into our grass-fed beef sticks. And we just really wanted to find a way to support them because they became like family. So eventually I do think I've become so passionate about it that we just bought some land in Colorado, and there's actually a ranch right across from the way. And so eventually I do think we'll have our own, and we might want to get into a teaching farm. But right now we just work with like dozens of ranches and farms worldwide, or I'm sorry, domestically.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, hang on a second. I want to hold that thought, but I want to go back to something else because, you use the word grass-fed in talking about the meat sticks. And I want to come back to what does that term grass-fed mean? Because I think many people believe that grass-fed means that the animals are fed on grass from birth until they're harvested, for slaughter. And that may not be the case. So can you explain sort of, simply the ins and outs of grass-fed?
Yeah, such a good question. And sorry, I didn't answer that the last time. But yes, so grass-fed, not a highly regulated term. I think it was back in 2016, they stopped regulating that term. And so every cow is grass-fed for the majority of their lives in the beginning, right? And what matters is what's happening the last part in 90 to 120 days. And a lot of times, even grass-fed cows are then fed grain, right? Which changes the nutrient profile, which changes how they're, improving or not improving the ecosystem. It can be okay, but most grass-fed, I would say, is not regenerative, right? And then we also have more nuance than that. I'm involved in this research project called the Beef Nutrient Density Project, and they're even finding that nutritionally there are differences between even grass feeding entirely for their lives on a monoculture, in other words, pasture with just one type of grass, versus those that are raised on diverse pastures with several species, and they're seeing enhanced phytochemical profiles in that kind of grass-fed. So yeah, grass-fed is not always grass-fed and finished, and you always have to just get to know the producer in order to really ascertain where they land on that. And also the regenerative label is really hard to trust because there's no regulation there either. And so again, really important to educate yourselves, understand what truly regenerative agriculture is, get involved in your local community, and just ask the hard questions.
Yeah. So did you start out partnering with farms in a particular state, or have you always been sort of nationwide?
What we did in the beginning was we worked with co-ops. And so no, we worked with people who were doing grass-fed really, really well and had a few farms that they were working with. And then we eventually just found different sets of co-ops throughout the United States. And so that's what we do today. These co-ops manage, we find these, ranchers who are very passionate about regenerative agriculture, and just that is their goal, right? They are prioritizing the health of the environment at every stage of the process. And so then we find them and then we work with them. And that's how we've been able to go nationwide. But yeah, we just started locally at first with just one co-op and then just grew from there.
Yeah. And then are you going yourself to farms to sort of vet their practices? And doing farm tours. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do is do farm tours. I love hearing the ranchers, on the land talking about their animals, and everyone is so different.
Oh, it's so true. That's why context is like one of the major principles in regenerative agriculture. Because yeah, if you're going to go look in the Northeast, there's much different landscapes than if you're going to go find, even the ranches that we've sometimes worked with in places like Arizona, where there's considerably less water. And even in Montana, it looks very, very different. So yeah, it's one of the best parts of the process. And we have one rancher in particular who he said he looks out and sees, he can hear literally 150 different beings on the land at night. There's just like so much life happening on their ranches. It's really special.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So, sorry, I forgot to unplug my phone here. So it's, so you talked about you're on this project, assessing, nutrient values of meat. Can you talk more about that? Because I think people are really interested in understanding, like, we have this concept that, better raised meat, is better for the environment, and there may be some nutritional benefits, but you can't really tie it down to exactly what are those nutritional benefits. So I think people would love to hear, what are they? Why should we make this choice? Because it can be more expensive. But again, you pay for what you get, right?
Yeah.
So talk about what you're finding in your research project that you're working on.
Right. So this is a big project called Beef Nutrient Density Project, and it's Dr. Van Vliet of Utah State is the one, and the Bionutrient Food Association. They are the two major players in this. And so far, I think there's maybe like 80 farms that they have sourced from. And we look at beef samples, 3 different ribeyes are sent in, and then forage samples, and then soil samples, and sometimes stool samples from the animals. And then we take all this and you use something called metabolomics, which we often see like 13 nutrients on nutrition label, and there's about 150 that we actually kind of create in databases. But there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of compounds in foods that we don't even fully understand. And metabolomics allows us to see that wide array of the nutrients and how they change. And so historically, we know in beef, a lot of times there's higher levels of antioxidants like glutathione when it's grass-fed, higher levels of vitamin A and certain B vitamins and minerals. Usually it's kind of tied to the soil, right? So that kind of varies by the region. We also see changes in the fatty acid profile, higher levels, 2 to 3 times higher levels of conjugated linoleic acid, which has been shown to have cardiovascular and immune supportive properties. And then we have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, it doesn't matter. The absolute amount of omega-3s isn't that high. But what research has shown is that when you look at what happens in the blood of people who consume either grass-fed or grain-fed, the levels of omega-3 fatty acids increase significantly. And so again, it's a small amount can still have a significant impact. And then we also find higher levels of longer chain saturated fatty acids. Most people just think, oh, saturated fat, that's bad. But it is a diverse group of fatty acids, right? We have neutral ones like stearic acid, which don't seem to raise cholesterol. And then we have palmitic and myristic, which do seem to raise cholesterol. And then we have longer chain forms, which have actually been shown to be protective against cardiovascular disease. And then the other side, and what metabolomics is really allowing us to gain access to, is the phytonutrients. So terpenoids, carotenoids, these typical nutrients that we associate with plants are found in far greater amounts in grass-fed and finished beef. And they have anti-inflammatory, anti-diabetic, anti-parasitic, like they have so many wonderful properties, even though they're not considered essential nutrients. But we do know that they can potentially, mediate inflammation and other things that are really, really central to a healthy, happy life. And so, yes, most people don't know exactly how much of a difference it makes, but there is one trial that did look at, okay, if you eat wild kangaroo meat, for example, which would have been fed grass, and then you compare it to grain-fed meat, it looked like the levels of inflammation in the blood after that meal were significantly lower in the wild meat. So Dr. Van Vliet is also doing a phase 2 in his trials, where he is looking at someone eating a grain-fed burger versus someone eating a grass-fed and finished burger and someone eating an Impossible burger. And I actually got to see this when I was there last week. So he has his participants come in, they eat 8 ounces of this meat and they don't tell them which one it is. Then they're hooked up to an IV. And then for the next 5 hours, they just sit there, and eventually they'll cross over and they'll do each of those different kind of like trials, or they'll do each of the different meat types and then look at what happens in the blood afterwards. So we're even on the brink of understanding not only are the nutrient profiles different, but do the nutrient profiles measurably impact human health? And his last one that he's involved in that I'm really excited about is he'll look at what happens when a diet is entirely regenerative, fruits, vegetables, animal products, versus a diet that is only conventionally raised. And what does that do for human health? But so far, he is still collecting data, of course, but he says the differences are significant, like 50% differences in the metabolites in grass-fed versus grain-fed beef products so far.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, I have followed a little bit on Dr. Van Vliet's work, and it's pretty interesting. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So I do have a question about the fatty acid profile. You said that you're seeing more omega-3s. Is that alpha linolenic acid, or is that the long chain essential fatty acids, EPA and DHA?
Ooh, what a great question. It's all of them.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, you're seeing, and there's actually another fatty acid that he's paying a lot of attention to. It's called DPA, which a lot of times isn't measured in the fatty acid analysis, which is why some people will say, you know, the amounts of omega-3s are not that high, but there is this one, and it kind of can convert either way to EPA and DHA. And so that is also a significant contributor. But yeah, the ALA, alpha linoleic acid, is high too, because it is actually in the forages. But then the cows also contain the longer chain forms, EPA and DPA and DHA, which is what our human bodies really do well when we consume.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so important for people to recognize that, you know, what our bodies are looking for is the EPA and the DHA and also the DPA. And that these foods are direct sources of those. So I'm very interested and happy to hear that that's being found in the research. So
yeah,
that's awesome. So let's kind of get back to your company, talking about Wild Pastures. I know in your subscription plan, you have these sort of scheduled boxes. So what are some of the most popular items that people are getting in their boxes?
Yeah. So gosh, it's, I'd say our sausage is one of the most impressive. And then we also have our steaks are just to die for. Our bacon is really, really popular as well. We just made a pork chop that I loved. Also we have like chicken wings, and we have fish, we have cod and salmon. Those are really popular too. So I don't even think we can say that there's one favorite, except for the breakfast sausage. I think that is maybe the favorite, but people seem to really just appreciate all of the different meats for different reasons. And we have this really vigorous and engaged Facebook community for Wild Pastures, and they just share recipes and tips and tricks, because it is different, right? When you have fully pastured regenerative meats, it's just a little bit different. But and we have a cookbook. So
yes, and I do have your cookbook, and lots of really interesting recipes there. And I think, you know, we didn't really talk about this, but you just brought it up that you're not only selling beef, but you have a wide variety of pasture raised, regenerative raised animal products, including pork and poultry, and then the wild caught fish. So,
and we're looking into lamb and bison right now.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah, hope to just continue to expand and expand.
Yeah, and I imagine, you know, when you're looking for sources, you have to, one of the things that's high on the list, I imagine, is can you actually provide the quantities that we need? So maybe that's an issue with finding good resources. So
100%. Yeah, there are so many wonderful regenerative farmers who reach out, but they're just not quite at the scale that we need right now. But yeah, hopefully we'll all get there, and the supply chain will continue to grow. People seem really passionate about it, so I think it will.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So you talked about, you were doing all this originally for Paleovalley and then moving into the meat delivery. And then you went into a restaurant. So what was that like? Like going from where you were to we're going to open a restaurant, because restaurants, like the restaurants, the survival rate of restaurants is pretty low, right? So how did you make that decision, and how did that all come about?
Well, basically, Chad and I have always just wanted a really good grass-fed burger, right? And then we, of course, that was the big one. And it is our son's favorite food. He used to say, I need the hamburger. So
Right.
anyway, so we're like, okay. And we always knew we always have phases. We're like, that's phase 5, right? When we get everything in place. But then we met this guy named Mike Geary, and he's environmental science guy, very successful in the nutrition space. And he said, I had a dream to create a grass-fed burger restaurant that was actually healthy and that, created incentive for regenerative farmers. And so we just put our heads together and our skills. And so we went into business with him. Unfortunately, we started during the coronavirus. Oh man. All sorts of challenging, but when people start to really understand, like you, what we're doing, why it matters, why we use the ingredients, why regenerative agriculture is important, we have a very loyal following, right? People drive for miles and miles to come back. They say we're regulars that are in multiple times a week. So people just really, really kind of get it. We even had these like big wigs at this huge international, multinational food company come and have us present to them about what regenerative agriculture is, about why we're using tallow, so that they could later implement it, because they just see that this is something that really excites people. We also have people from the college down in Boulder, environmental science majors, who say they're not learning anything about regenerative ag in their programs. But they really wanted to work and be around it and kind of learn to understand it. So it's been crazy. Luckily, we have an amazing manager, and he has much experience in the restaurant space as opposed to us. We don't know anything. So we kind of just support him from afar and let him do his magic. And he's been wonderful. His name's Brandon. And that's why we have so many great reviews. You'll just see, I even saw one the other day that said it's clear. I saw the manager speaking to the employees. It's just clear how much he cares and how kind he is. And so, yeah, luckily we wouldn't be able to do it without him or without Mike Geary, but for whatever reason, we just had the right people at the right time. And so far we've been able to make it work. We're going to be at 2 years in October. So, yeah, it's growing all the time, but it's definitely been, as you say, a challenge, especially given the timing with the pandemic.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Not the best time. Yeah, I have to say that my husband occasionally hosts people for his work, from out of the state, even, out of the country. And anytime he is hosting a guest, he always takes them to Wild Pastures for a meal. Every time they always say, this is the best burger I've ever had. He had one of his colleagues from Norway. He brought them to your restaurant. He's like, I have never had a burger this good in my entire life. And unfortunately for him to just run down to get the burger whenever he wants is not possible, because he lives on the other side of the world. But he was really impressed. So it's been very, very, puts my husband in a very good light when he brings his colleagues there to eat at your restaurant. So it's fabulous.
Oh, and I so appreciate that. That just means the world to me, because that's what we want to do. The best burger in Boulder. And, grass-fed meat tastes a little bit different, but in other countries, right? Like people are kind of just like adapted to that type of experience for flavor, right? And people who consume our burgers, they've definitely said that it's one of the best they've ever had, despite it being grass-fed. And all, of course, we have all the house-made sauces and the cheese and the wild sauce and the gluten-free buns, and so and, egg, avocado, bacon. I mean, whatever you want on the burger. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, awesome. And one of the things that allows your restaurant to be on my list of approved restaurants is that you don't use any omega-6 vegetable oils. I think that is, or quote unquote vegetable oils, seed oils. I think that is so important. I make it a strict policy to 100% avoid omega-6 seed oils in my life. And so that's one of the main reasons why we don't have a lot of restaurants that we go to, because they don't commit to that. And that is something that you publicly commit to, signs on the walls. So can you talk about why you have chosen not to do that? I can imagine why, because I know why I avoid it, but talk about it for those who are listening.
Yes, no, I love that you appreciate that. So basically coming into nutrition from a paleo space, right? Anything that is incongruent kind of historically and really novel foodstuffs, I'm very wary of. So vegetable oils, they came into the picture the late 1800s, right? And not because of any well-demonstrated health benefit, right? It was William Procter, James Gamble. They had this cottonseed oil that was an excess because of these other industries they had, lubricating machinery and such. And they decided, hey, why don't we hydrogenate it, a process that was recently invented, and make it look like lard and then sell it and then teach the American public that it's healthier based on absolutely no data whatsoever, right? And so later we found out, right, that the way it was originally formulated was 50% trans fat. And anyway, that causes a lot of heart disease. But all of these other vegetable oils after the Industrial Revolution, they were able to be created as well, right? So the seed oil, like you're saying, you're not going to be able to, on your own, manually extract the oil from these like cotton, corn, rice bran, sunflower. And so it's a very industrialized process, chemical solvents, high heat and temperature and pressure. And these are omega-6 oils are very fragile, right? So their linoleic acid is prone to oxidation. And when something oxidizes, it can actually create inflammation in the body. And they have high levels like corn oil, 50% polyunsaturated fatty acids, and even higher sunflower oil. So when you use these oils and then heat them, they can create, originally in the processing of them, they can create harmful byproducts. They're made with additives as well. And then when you heat them in a fryer, like most people do at restaurants, they create even more toxic byproducts. And so we want cooking fats that are stable, right? They're higher in saturated fats and monounsaturated fats, because I think it's really dangerous. And a lot of people will argue about this point. The vegetable oils aren't, they might have health benefits. They've got vitamin E, all the things, but there have been trials to suggest that they might be harmful in animals, in cell culture, and then in human experiments, like the Minnesota coronary trial, corn oils trial, the LA veterans trial. LA veterans was interesting because they saw an increased risk in cancer potentially for those who were consuming seed oils. And so there's research and epidemiology will tell you one thing, but these other trials will tell you there's a reason to be concerned. But because it runs counter to our evolutionary history, they're highly processed, industrialized process, and they're very fragile fats. These omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids that we require in small amounts, but that as a country, we are consuming so many more than we actually need. I think I read this page the other day that said, on average, Americans have between 5 and 10 tablespoons of these oils every day. And that would be something like 98 ears of corn, 600 grapes, 40 cups of rice. This would be the equivalent of 5 tablespoons. So we have somehow enabled us to consume way more of these oils than we need. And at a higher picture thing, our omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid ratio in our diets is one thing that is thought to potentially increase our rates of inflammation if you have too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, or decrease if you have a 1-to-1 ratio. So when we consume these large amounts of oils that are high in omega-6s, we put a skew in that ratio and potentially perpetuate the inflammation that's at the root of most chronic diseases. And so we did not want our restaurant to be another source of these oils. I think American consumers are already consuming way too much, and I'm a little bit concerned about it, just like you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, what do you make your fries in? What oil do you use to make your fries? McDonald's used to do the same thing. We make it in tallow, right? Tallow is beef fat, right? It's very stable fat. It's about half saturated fat, which we love, and then half monounsaturated fat. So saturated fats are the most stable, and then monounsaturated fats still more
stable than polyunsaturated fats with many of these chemical bonds. And so it's about 50-50, just a little bit of polyunsaturated fat. And plus it enables us to utilize the entire animal, right? So it's a stable fat, very high smoke point, around 400 degrees. And then, whole animal utilization. And the fries are absolutely delicious, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. People sort of demonize French fries. They say that if you're going to, the classic example of junk food is always French fries. And or if you don't want to call them French, fries, right? And I am of the opinion that it's not necessarily the French fries themselves. It's what are you cooking them in? What are you cooking those potatoes in? Because I have no problem whatsoever with fries that are cooked in a stable fat like tallow. And so, and as you say, they taste much better. They are, there's not really this associated negative health impacts. So I'm very much a fan.
I'm so glad you are. Yeah. And I love it too. And French fries or, potatoes with a stable oil, coconut oil or tallow is a staple in our home. And I am obsessed with healthy food. So yeah, I think it's all about how you go about the process.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. I love talking to people who produce the food that I buy and the food that other people obviously buy. But it is so nice to hear someone who is as committed about high quality food as I am, because I am like a major food quality purist. So hearing someone who is just as committed as I am is really, motivating and inspiring. So thank you. So how can people find out more about Wild Pastures, Paleovalley, the restaurant? Tell us what all of your contact points are.
Yes, if you want to reach out to me, you can always do so at autumn@paleovalley.com. And then you can go to paleovalley.com. That's the supplement and beef stick side. And then wildpastures.com for the regenerative meat delivery service. And then Wild Pastures Burger Co.com for the burger place. And I hope that I get to meet you one day. Maybe we can grab a burger. And just know that I could never do any of the work we do without people who are just passionate as you are and actually support it and put your money where your heart is. And so thank you for that. Yeah,
absolutely. One question I didn't ask that we should say is your meat deliveries, is that just Colorado? Do you do it nationwide? Tell people about that.
Yeah, so no, it is nationwide. We work with, like I said, co-ops throughout the country. Our goal is we've established warehouses in few sections of the United States. We have Ohio and Arizona and Colorado, and with the ultimate goal of becoming very bio-regional. But for right now, we do the best that we can. It can't always be local to Colorado, but it is, as close as possible because that just makes sense, from a business standpoint. And I think that is ideal for consumers as well. And eventually we hope to be that. But right now it can come from many different kinds of farms throughout the United States. Or not many kinds of farms, but farms located in areas, always regenerative farms.
Yeah. But anyone in the, I assume, contiguous United States, I don't know if you're shipping to Hawaii and Arizona, but Alaska, anyone in the contiguous United States, it's an A state, can order and get their shipment.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm sorry. We are available nationwide. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure. And I would love to meet with you and sit down and have a burger. That would be awesome. So, all right. All righty. Well, thank you so much for being here and have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Hi there. And thanks for listening today. If what you heard today inspires you to want to pursue an education in holistic nutrition here at Nutrition Therapy Institute, please check us out on our website, ntischool.com, and reach out to us at admissions@ntischool.com. Our in-depth comprehensive education is sure to provide you with the knowledge and skills you need to create the work of your dreams. Do something that feeds your passion, aligns with your values, and fuels your drive for a vital and meaningful life. It will be rewarding for yourself, your family, and anyone else with whom you interact. And with that, see you on the next episode.